Tom Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to follow my honourable friend, the member for Rhondda. I felt I was listening to a trailer for his forthcoming biography of Parliament, and I'm even more enthused about buying my copy now.
I hope the honourable gentleman will reference the fact that there are to be 2 volumes of the said work. He will be making 2 purchases rather than 1. Mr. Tom Harris.
As you might say, Mr. Speaker, it's now on the record. I wouldn't want the House to believe that I spend my whole time during this debate reading tweets, but I think it would be appropriate just to mention at the start that Ian Martin of the Daily Telegraph recently posted a blog which he titled, "How did David Big Society Cameron end up sanctioning a bonkers bill that bosses around charities?" I hope that will become required reading for the Leader of the House and his deputy and all government members who plan to vote for this bill, because the Leader of the House has told us that this will not have the effect which many members on this side of the House have insisted it will have. He has a long way to go if he's still trying to persuade Telegraph journalists. Mr. Speaker, me personally and 5 other members of the House, because we had the barefaced cheek to have long records of opposing nonsense like electoral reform. And they took out national newspaper advertising. They even came to my constituency to launch a specific campaign directed at me. It was very entertaining. We got lots of the leaflets and we plastered them all over my constituency office, my campaign office, not my publicly paid constituency office. And it had the effect of increasing my share of the vote above 50% for the first time since 2001, and my majority went up to 12,600. I could object to that particular campaign. I could welcome what's in this bill, because clearly if this bill becomes an act, that kind of campaign specifically targeting individual MPs would be outlawed. Actually, I don't want that kind of campaign to be outlawed. For a start, it's perfectly democratic. If people want to spend money faffing about and wittering on about some nonsense like electoral reform, that's entirely their business. They're welcome to it. It doesn't have any impact or relevance to my constituents, but if they want to spend the money on that, that's fine. And secondly, of course, is the effect that it had on my own majority. The problem with this bill, well, where do we start? One of the many problems with this bill is it actually affects areas that don't need redress, and it ignores areas that do need redress. I wonder if the Deputy Leader of the House will cast his memory back to last year, when the then Secretary of State for Culture had a little bit of a kerfuffle regarding his own Special Advisor Adam Smith. Now, it was clear that News International had lobbied Adam Smith to try to get a change of policy of the government with regards to the attempt to take over of Sky by News International. And we all remember the drama that ensued in this House. This bill would not affect that in the slightest, because only permanent secretaries and ministers are now affected. I used to lobby, before I came to this House, Mr. Speaker, for an organisation called Strathclyde Passenger Transport, and I knew then, and I know even more now, that if I want to affect policy, I don't speak to the minister. I will speak to the minister's PPS. I'll speak to the minister's SPAD. Those are the people who have a direct link to the minister, to the policy-making process. This bill does absolutely nothing. The bill it's actually an obnoxious piece of legislation. It's illiberal, it's anti-democratic, it's badly drafted. I am left with the conclusion it could only have come from the Liberal Democrats. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have on my phone, I know you don't like gimmicks like this, but I have on my phone a photograph of the Leader of the Liberal Democrats holding a pledge card during the last general election. I pledge to vote against any increase in tuition fees. He's flanked by the then Lib Dem candidate for Cambridge with a smile on his face, so I guess it was before he was actually elected to this place. And the Liberal Democrats at that time, presumably, had no objection at all to the NUS having a nationwide campaign targeting specific individuals, supporting their stance on tuition fees. But something tells me they don't want the NUS to lead a similar campaign next time in response to the Liberal Democrats' decision to do a complete U-turn on the policy and tuition fees. That's what this bill will do. This might as well have been called the Defend Liberals and Marginal Seats Bill, because that's all it does. Of course.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving way. I just wonder, would you read the specific place in the bill that would actually outlaw the things you're saying it would outlaw? Because so far I haven't actually seen them there. The actual specific things it says it was outlaw people doing that. Very interesting. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I've got 1 minute and 57 seconds in order to do that, so if the honourable gentleman forgive me, I'm sure he can find it himself.
It's not there.
Had this bill been proposed by the last Labour government, if exactly the same bill had been proposed by the last Labour government, not a single Lib Dem would vote for it. And when the next Labour government moves to abolish this legislation, by that time I hope the Lib Dems will have retaken their traditional and rightful place here in the opposition benches, and I suspect that even then not a single Lib Dem MP will object to the repeal of that particular act. Mr. Speaker, on the 5th of June I challenged the Prime Minister's questions, and I asked him, was it when an undercover reporter pretending to be a lobbyist entrapped an MP? Was that when you decided that now was the right time to launch an all-out attack on the trade unions? Who is demanding? Where is the demand for new curbs, new regulations on trade unions? Why is it the Conservative and Liberal MPs are so frightened of trade unions? I've been a member of a trade union my whole working life. I am proud to be a member of Unite. For me, that's a matter of pride. For many workers, it's a matter of necessity. So why do the Conservatives still see trade unions as the enemy within? This is a part of the legislation that simply does not need to be there. So where has the demand come from? What are they so scared of? Is it now un-British for there to be any kind of fierce political debate during election campaigns? If the Leader of the House is right, if this legislation will not result in the gagging of third parties, what's the bill for? Either third parties' behaviour recently in the last years has been unacceptable and needs to be addressed, or it's been perfectly acceptable and doesn't need to be addressed, in which case there is no point to this appalling piece of legislation.